Today, United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People 2007. What are the articles in this declaration? Today we want to say about the 10 article, what is written in this declaration. Article number 11. 1. Indigenous peoples have the right to practice to and revitalize their cultural traditions and customs. This includes the right to maintain, protect, and develop the past, present, and future manifestations of their cultures, such as archaeological and historical sites, artifacts, designs, ceremonies, technologies, and visual and performing arts and literature. Article 11.2. States shall provide redress through effective mechanisms which may include restitution, development in conjunction with indigenous peoples with respect to their cultural, intellectual, religious, and spiritual property taken within their free, prior, and informed consent or in violation of their laws, traditions, and customs. Article 12.1. Indigenous peoples have the right to manifest, practice, develop, and teach their spiritual and religious traditions, customs, and ceremonies, the right to maintain, protect, and have access in privacy to their religious and cultural sites, the right to the use and control of their ceremonial objects, and the right to the repatriation of their human remains. Article 12.2. States shall seek to enable the access and or repatriation of ceremonial objects and human remains in their possession through fair, transparent, and effective mechanisms developed in conjunction with indigenous peoples concerned. Article 13.1. Indigenous peoples have the right to revitalize, use, develop, and transmit to future generations their histories, language, oral traditions, philosophies, writings, systems, and literatures, and to designate and retain their own names for communities, places, and persons. Article 13.2. States shall take effective measures to ensure that this right is protected and also to ensure that indigenous peoples can understand and be understood in political, legal, and administrative proceedings where necessary through the provision of interpretation or by other appropriate means. Article 14.1. Indigenous peoples have the right to establish and control their educational systems and institutions providing education in their own languages appropriate to their cultural methods of technique and learning. Article 14.2. Indigenous individuals, particularly children, have the right to all levels and forms of education of the state without discrimination. Article 14(3). States shall, in conjunction with indigenous peoples, take effective measures in order for indigenous individuals, particularly children, including those living outside their communities, to have access, when possible, to an education in their own culture and provided in their own languages. Article 15(1). Indigenous peoples have the right to the dignity and diversity of their cultures, traditions, histories, and aspirations, which shall be appropriately reflected in education and public information. Article 15(2). States shall take effective measures in consultation and cooperation with the indigenous peoples concerned to combat prejudice and eliminate discrimination, and to promote tolerance, understanding, and good relations among indigenous peoples and all other segments of society. Article 16(1). Indigenous peoples have the right to establish their own media in their own languages and to have access to all forms of non-indigenous media without discrimination. Article 16(2). States shall take effective measures to ensure that state-owned media duly reflect indigenous cultural diversity. States, without prejudice to ensuring full freedom of expression, should encourage privately owned media to adequately reflect indigenous cultural diversity. Article 17(1). Indigenous individuals and peoples have the right to enjoy fully all rights established under applicable international and domestic law. Article 17(2). States shall, in consultation and cooperation with indigenous peoples, take specific measures to protect indigenous children from economic exploitation and from performing any work that is likely to be hazardous or to interfere with the child's education or to be harmful to the child's health or physical, mental, spiritual, moral, or social development, taking into account their special vulnerability and the importance of education for their empowerment. Article 17(3). Indigenous individuals have the right not to be subjected to any discriminatory conditions of labor and inter alia employment or salary. Article 18. Indigenous peoples have the right to participate in decision-making matters which would affect their rights through representatives chosen by themselves in accordance with their own procedures, as well as to maintain and develop their own indigenous making institutions. Article 19. States shall consult and cooperate in good faith with the indigenous peoples concerned through their own representatives institutions in order to obtain their free, prior, and informed consent before adopting and implementing legislative or administrative measures that may affect them. Article 20. 1. Indigenous peoples have the right to maintain and develop their political, economic, and social systems or institutions to be secure in the enjoyment of their own means of subsistence and development, and to engage freely in all their traditional and other economic activities. Article 22. Indigenous peoples deprived of their means of subsistence and development are entitled to just and fair redresses. Above this article, it is clearly mentioned about the rights of the indigenous people, but in Assam, the indigenous peoples are not getting the above rights, and so we, the indigenous people of Assam, want to implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, by which the rights of indigenous people can be protected and implement for the future generation of indigenous people.